You're listening to The Adventuring Party. Talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Shane.
And I'm Savage.
And to us here today to celebrate St. Paddy's Day.
St. Paddy's Day, my favourite holiday in the Roman calendar. It's St. Patrick's Day episode. If you're Irish, give me a kiss. If you're not Irish, give me a pint. Is, I think, the traditional way of celebrating St. Patrick's Day today.
Yeah, well, you have the slight problem that kissing is invariably fatal at the moment.
Oh yeah, well done 2020. We've ruined kissing strangers because of coronavirus, amongst other, and some Twitter movements. Anyways, we've got our National Day of Celebration was, if you're listening to this on the day we release it, was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're recording this not on St. Patrick's Day because we're hungover now and wishing death upon ourselves and our enemies. So we have decided to record a St. Patrick's Day episode and talk about all sorts of things related to being Irish and brilliant and in gaming. So anyways, on to the meat of this episode, on to the meat and potatoes, or the pint and potatoes.
Ireland in gaming.
How the Irish have been depicted in games over the years and gaming. Specifically the tabletop role-playing, but we'll see if we can dig out another couple of examples like board games. We've got some notes. Shane, I'm going to let you kick off. You've got more notes, so you win. Podcasting.
Yes, so the primary kind of touch point for Ireland and Irish-inspired things in gaming is through Celtic mythology. That wonderful set of stories and tall tales that, spoilers, not even the experts actually know have a consistent through line on. It's all a bunch of stories. And
let's talk about the Marvel multiverse if we want to talk about inconsistent universes.
Fair enough.
Coming from an oral tradition, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah, there's disagreements as to when and where certain things happened, or if they even happened at all. And that's just the way we like it.
The old Sean Key storytellers were more interested in entertaining the audience in front of them than creating a massive consistent continuity.
Like a good GM.
Yeah, fair.
They had to read the table and adjust the story to suit the tastes of whoever was paying for their dinner.
But yeah, Celtic mythology is sort of this wonderful go-to for all kinds of things because it's European and has lots of quotation marks good English translations and thought on it, but isn't just standard medieval.
Yeah, well, what would I say about that? We've got some probably excellent or close to good examples of things that have been pulled out of Celtic mythology and rammed into a stat block to be thrown at players, don't we?
A lot of them are Fae, and this is sort of a
running theme.
Now, we'll get back to the explanation of why this is later on in the show, but for various reasons, mostly by the English portraying it this way, Ireland has sort of this connection with the Fae or the Fair Folk or the Dunya Sea.
To the Danann?
There's all these things. Like there's a general association with Fae and Faecraft, and this has sort of been smeared across other things. For example, the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians, they're sort of this bunch of sea giants that sort of just claimed this island. Did they actually pull the island out of the earth? I think it depends on the story.
What it comes down to is good guys versus bad guys.
Yes, like
from the teller's
humans, I
perspective.
think, come from like Scotland or something to take back Ireland from the Tuatha De Danann and kick them out.
Well, we won't go into the exact details because there aren't any.
Yes.
But what we can do is talk about, if we sort of zero in on some of the monsters that come from Irish mythology that we find popping up again and again in D&D, especially. So we've got a few kind of, that makes sense examples. And then I think there's one that people might be a little bit surprised to learn is of Irish extraction.
Yeah.
So obviously, things like the Banshee.
Yeah, the Banshee or Fairy Woman is this legend of a lady who screams to herald the death of someone, which is based on actual medieval tradition of rich people hiring extra mourners for their funerals. So they would just basically get a whole bunch of women to wail and tear at their clothing in performative grief.
So in D&D that translates into a spirit, a ghost, that has all of the usual sort of ghostly features, and then has some horrifying visage, corrupting touch, and also has that classic wail, which allows them to target, what is it? It's a fear effect, I believe.
It reduces them to 0 hit points automatically, because you're
Nice.
not allowed to just kill people straight away in D&D anymore, except when you are.
Well, not when it's a challenge rating 4 monster. It shouldn't be allowed to put down entire parties. Just by shouting at them.
And some would say that that's the 5th edition being weak. But again, very heavy association with elves and fae. This is sort of we don't have time to go into the process by which elves have become a sort of dumping ground for Celtic myth and
or in D&D, a lot of the bad things that sort of boil out of graveyards tend to be dead elves of one stripe or another, for some reason. Something I've noticed in 5th Ed.
Yeah.
So we've got those guys. We've got the
Fomorians.
Fomorians, who are, I think, these days probably best associated with HeroQuest.
No, they're in D&D as well. They're just not in the main monster manual.
Not anymore. They appeared in 4th Ed, I believe.
Yes, in 4th Ed they got a really big push as being the specialist giants from the Feywild, because sort of as the second wave of 4th edition releases, they did a big push of the Feywild as this really important thing. Gnomes come from there, Fomorians come from there, the Eladrin come from there, and they just sort of grasp onto the idea of the Fey realm as this important thing. And of course, because there's this link between the Fey and Celtic myth, they stole a bunch of things, such as the Fomorians.
So they get a kind of a visual from... Yeah, they have that sort of Celtic motif going on with some of their stuff.
Yeah, and it's not a bad read to have the Fomorians as these sort of unnaturally ugly giants, because that's not too far from where they lie in the original myths. In particular, I think we should possibly talk about the king of the Fomorians.
Ah, yes. This is the one I was kind of holding back. Is a Balor.
Yes.
Or Balor in this case. Named as Balor, but has translated and transmuted through the years in the Monstrous Manual into a type of demon. Mm-hmm. Or is it a devil? I think it's a demon.
No, it's a demon. Yes. Well, there's a bit of a story with that. First off, to the listeners, the original before it was cool Balor was this king of the Fomorians, a gigantic cyclops with an eye that basically just shot beams, which could do anything between kill a man with a glance to set one of the 4 provinces of Ireland aflame in a single glance. He
was kind of a big deal.
Yes. I'm pretty sure it was the god. Was it the two? Irish mythology is not 100% consistent of whether the gods were the Tuatha Dé Danann or beat the Tuatha Dé Danann. It seems to change from time to time, but yeah, I think a few of our Celtic gods eventually saw him off.
We'll definitely have to drop a note to a Wikipedia article on who the hell the Tuatha Dé Danann allegedly are.
Yes,
but put that in here.
But yes, the story of how he became a D&D demon is a little less Irish and a little bit more litigative, in that originally this creature, the general of the demon hordes, was simply called a Balrog, in a wonderful example of that's a normal name. It's perfectly fine. We can just use it and no one will notice. And then D&D got very popular and printed a lot of books. And then someone from the Tolkien estate rung them up and said, "What are you doing?"
Well, that's our word. You can't use it.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
So the Balor is a good stand-in.
Yeah, I think possibly a bit presumptuous to just immediately jump on that as your thing, but it was a similar similarly spelled name, and it was a similar Lord of Darkness.
Yes,
so
it happens a lot with demons. I mean, at one time or another, like Satan or the Archangel have been identified as Beelzebub or Bahamut or all sorts of other sort of names that are just other demons from things like Paradise Lost. And it just, the names are sort of interchangeable as far as those who oppose demons are concerned, which I suppose is fair. Which
is possibly another tie-in back to Celtic myth and the process of the centuries-long process of turning all of those Irish myths and legends into it was just the early Christians and the servants of Satan having a bit of a punch-up.
Well, so as we retreat from that particular Moms Against D&D kind of, was it mad? Mothers angry about D&D?
Mothers Against D&D.
Were the Satan opposing and by extension D&D opposing group from back in the day.
I'm more talking about just the whole process of the English rewriting all of Irish myth.
Are you still sore about that?
Our entire country's still sore about that.
So the Skelkies or Selkies are another one that pop up in, I don't know if they're in the current Monsters Manual, but they've certainly featured in the past as sort of seal people.
Yes.
That find their origin story here on Irish shores, not having invented the Rose of Tralee. Sirens from the Sea were for Irish fishermen were more associated with sort of muzzle-headed seal people who would occasionally steal you off a boat or take your fish, things like that.
Yeah, and it's sort of like there's an awful lot of similarities with mermaid type legends and
just without the looks.
Well, no, I'm pretty sure some Selkie tales, like, they could just sort of unzip the sealskin and there would be a beautiful naked woman inside.
Wishful thinking, I suppose.
Well, that is what most of these sea stories consist of.
Sea can do terrible things to a man.
And we have an awful lot of sea on this island.
Riddled with brine, he was. I think that I'm sure there are a few more. There's actually a couple that spring to mind that don't find their way into the mythology, into D&D or others. There's a few Irish sort of monsters out there. We've got our own Loch Ness, essentially. I think it's the Loch Ness or the Loch Ness.
Yeah.
Who is a sort of a Nessie stand-in for this part of the world. Anywhere there's deep water and illicit hooch and not much to do, you'll find someone who will claim to have seen some sort of thing in the lake.
It's almost like being forged out of the earth by glaciers makes deep lakes sometimes.
It is often a feature, not a bug. So that's where D&D kind of plucks a few.
Well, it does. It goes to a few more places. Like, I'm thinking particularly of the druid as the.
That's very true. An entire character class that sort of finds its origin in sort of Celtic religious practices.
There's a really good question of exactly how unique the druid is in mythological terms versus how it has niche protection in modern D&D, and that if you look at the old legends of Nadri, as you would use in the old thing, they were really just wizards, and
druid is the name that they kind of had.
Yeah, it's the same word. It's the same root of driocht, which is the Irish word for wizard.
I think we definitely associate certain very concrete things with druids as they're depicted now.
Yes,
that there's more of a focus on the natural world and the mysticism around animals and plants the cycles of nature.
Which I think comes from this depiction of Ireland as this very wild, untamed place. And do we want to go into that now or save it for
that kind of takes us to depictions of Ireland and the Irish in role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a bit of time to research this. Now, we're not going to cover all of them, but there are some...
We could be here for a dozen episodes.
There are some good ones. There's some ones that just generally pass without mention because they didn't do anything wrong. And as is often the case, doing nothing wrong means that there's nothing to be said about you, really, except well done. And then there's a whole bunch of really terrible, really awful depictions of Ireland and the Irish through sort of fantasy, sci-fi, modern day, horror, all sorts of different genres of role-playing games.
You're going to see a few companies come up more than once during this.
Do you want to kick us off?
Well,
Who's first for a beating?
do we want to do the beatings or the OKs?
Let's mention an okay one first.
Well, I think one of the ones that comes up as a really good effort is the Pendragon supplement Pagan Shore, because this is most likely due to the wonderful influence of the late Greg Stafford, who was quite a stickler for getting the whole Arthurian vibe.
Right.
And while we can't say for certain that the depiction of Ireland as this a wild pagan land, but still with its own unique culture and way of life, is particularly necessarily accurate, it is certainly in the Arthurian bent of this fully realized but un-Christian land.
Well, if you go, we're talking sort of pre-Roman, British Isles and Ireland, which is like a politically completely different sort of kettle of fish,
yes,
and culturally very similar in many respects. There was the Druidic traditions existed on both islands to almost an equal extent, sort of varying with the geography and the climate. So Pendragon is talking almost as much about the conditions in Ireland as it is England in that sort of time frame. The differentiation only really comes post the Roman invasion. But like Pendragon's Pagan Shores is, as from all accounts, an excellent depiction of Druidic practice and the sort of the mysterious island.
And it's not wrong to use Arthurian myth as a lens to view Ireland in, because our Arthurian legend grows out of a sort of proto-English Celt interaction.
The shared sort of mythology there.
Especially through Wales. The early legends that forged the Arthurian myth of the 12th century are very, very based in Welsh traditions, and those have a common culture with Ireland and Scotland. Even if the language has done very interesting things, they are still Celtics, as Mr. Large.
They might turn that around and you would say, well, those guys on the other island won over. They're more or less still like us. I wouldn't even attempt to pick that particular bundle apart. Pendragon, full marks.
I've also heard decent things about Harn, which is another sort of very early medieval setting with its own. Although it's tends to be more of a setting than a system, although they have tried to make the Harn world setting a few times.
Okay.
They have it sort of lives in that sort of pre British imperialism area. So a culture, Celtic style cultures are more egalitarian setting. Although there is apparently one interesting analogy to Northern Ireland, which happens in one of their supplements.
Right. No one can really resist talking about the Troubles, can they?
No, it writers just kind of love drama.
It rears its head in its ugliest aspect, I think, in a lot of the ways that the World of Darkness setting has looked at modern Ireland, or at least mid-20th century Ireland, which is where a lot of these depictions tend to get stuck. So after you get past the sort of druids and fairy stuff, anything that sort of starts in the 20th century or the late 19th century tends to get really stuck on the question of Irish nationalism and the division of the island and all of this other stuff. And it can be quite infuriating as an Irish reader or player of these games to see these incredibly warped takes on the political situation on the island. Shane. But World of Darkness, like egregious misuse on occasion.
So we've seen complaints about the werewolf supplement on the Fianna, which is a bunch of werewolves stealing the name of some of our greatest, the Avengers of the Celtic myth.
These are the werewolf clan that were basically the Irish ones, or the sort of Celtic ones, are in
Redford. Use magical drink,
probably called Rory. Mad as hatters.
Yeah.
Rory the mad drunk bugger
Yeah.
would be a prototypical Fianna in and sort of melee specialists with great big claymores and probably a kilt.
Yeah.
A bit of a bastardization of lots of the sort of Celtic sort of diaspora. And they were, of course, they owned Ireland in the World of Darkness, sort of had, more or less had a lock on it,
Yeah.
with some intrusions from crazy mages, usually the Verbana, and I'm sure there was something from the vampire side as well.
Yeah, the
Bram Stoker's sort of trip through Dublin being the genesis of the modern vampire. So,
yeah.
we could talk about that sort of tangentially. Vampires probably get the best shake out of most depictions of Irish mythological creatures.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right, folks. We're claiming all of vampires as Irish on Paddy's Day.
Even the sparkly ones.
So give a kiss to a sparkly bloodsucker. Pint of blood.
But yes.
Okay, so World of Darkness has some pretty bad ones. I like the World of Darkness LARP. The story, what's it called?
The Camarilla?
Camarilla, yeah. Apparently was just rife with people with sort of, if they had an Irish background, they'd usually go with ex-IRA, which, if you're from Ireland, is a difficult one to sort of just ignore. It's like, oh, really? Yeah, a few, yeah.
For listeners who aren't aware, there's a sort of idea. The American idea of the IRA as these wonderful freedom fighters is generally referring to the IRA that existed in the Irish War of Independence in the 1920s, and not the Troubles era IRA, who were just terrorists and are now mostly drug dealers. So maybe you want to just be a little bit clearer about what you're talking about when you're lionizing certain groups.
It would be fair to say that there are many political movements that have found their roots in, let's say, direct action, that have since, at least in part, found their way to through a process of peace, and have a potential, at least, to form part of a normal political landscape now and in the future. This is generally not a nuance that escapes from the real world into the pages of RPGs, where you're just used as a sort of a mad bomber stereotype.
Yeah. The main thing is,
so no matter how you feel about the IRA or the segregation of the island, it just the unsubtle manner in which it's generally depicted is, I think, the crux of the problem here.
Yeah.
There's no attempt to understand why the IRA or why Northern Ireland or why the Troubles or anything like that. It's just used as, oh, I need a combat character and he's from Ireland. He'll be ex-IRA and he'll throw bombs and Semtex and have a great old time swigging whiskey and telling the RUC to get bent. It's really doesn't help.
No, it doesn't help. But what would help, Savage?
What would help?
Well,
Army Rangers are kick-ass. They've got all the same skill sets, probably a few more. The reason they're so good is because they've a huge background in anti-terrorism.
Yeah.
And they're politically nowhere near as problematic.
We have, I will say, if you're looking for an Irish military background that we are very proud of, the UN peacekeeping troops are some of the best in the world at not killing people.
Per capita, we've sent more blue hats than almost anybody else around the world, and we continue to do so. Yes, Irish peacekeeping troops have served ever from the Congo to the Middle East and beyond. An interesting quirk in Irish history is that there's a whole bunch of Israeli intelligence agents out there who are very fluent in Irish, as they needed it to listen in on conversations of our boys in the foxholes during the more heated moments of the Arab sort of the Arab Peninsula, the Arab regions, political doings, no more than ourselves. I can't imagine there's too few of them in MI in the intelligence services in Britain either. It's one way to keep a language alive is bloody insurrection. But yeah,
perhaps that's a good point.
Perhaps we're not a very good depiction of Ireland in role-playing circles.
Well, maybe. Well, that's one of the points, is that Ireland is a much more diverse place than people give it credit for.
Like most places.
Yes.
To be fair, we're getting to complain from inside our little bubble. But it is St. Patrick's Day, so we're going to we're going to take our license to do so. So if we move past the modern day, then depictions of Ireland in sort of sci-fi and cyberpunk tend to be no less problematic in terms of being a bit rubbish, really.
Yeah.
My favourite one has to be Shadowrun, where it is basically Elfland. We revert back to fairy tale and myth. The elves rechristen the entire island as Tirnanog, set up some how we call them, generous corporate tax schemes, and sit it out as immortal lords of the land. They kind of return to Ireland, kick everyone out, and declare it as a bit of a sort of Fey Israel, if my read is correct, which is typical in Shadowrun.
Yeah.
The Native Americans did the same somewhere in North America in another hilarious depiction of a misunderstood minority. But yeah, so we don't get the worst of it. But now, if you're in Shadowrun and you're Irish, you're probably an elf, fantastically wealthy, and sort of living it up in the Dubai of the Fey sort of diaspora.
That's a take, certainly.
It's a take, yeah. One of my favourites because it's so wildly strange.
I mean, you could possibly draw similarities to current corporate culture in Ireland, but
we'll get to that. Do you have any mod or any sci-fi takes for?
The main one is there is one from the superhero genre of Aberrant.
Oh right! I was trying to remember this one as I was going over this
where
night.
Ireland gets a very interesting few paragraphs in the Aberrant book, where they go into they start naming names. Start actually naming different political parties, working out this peace between Northern and Southern Ireland, without ever having realised that Southern Ireland is an independent country.
Yeah, and so Jerry Adams is name checked in this one, isn't he?
Yeah, they name checked Jerry Adams and Sinn Féin and the IRA and a whole bunch of other celebrities of early 90s troubles and peacekeeping, without ever realising that, no, Ireland is a country, not just another part of England. They seem to have thought that like two different parts of England were just having this weird fight for no reason.
Yeah, while all being administered over by an English government, who then sort of in a sop to these warring factions go, look, we'll just reunify Ireland, that place that we own all of anyways. I mean, if they'd swapped Dublin and Belfast, that might be sort of on the same parallel of just sheer, I don't understand what I'm talking about. It is probably one of the most egregious depictions of Ireland in all of role-playing.
Yeah, imagine if the US Civil War had been solved by London promising to to figure out the slavery problem.
Yeah, you two stop fighting, we'll put the country back together and you'll agree to disagree, right?
Yeah.
Who asked you?
Yeah,
it's amazing, and it's Aberrant. Yeah,
that was Aberrant.
It's just an amazingly wrong-headed take on absolutely everything to do with Ireland.
It's a particular thing where they clearly had to research everyone involved and get all the names right, but they didn't actually learn the actual situation,
even slightly. No.
Yeah,
and so that takes me to one of my main sort of general gripes about Ireland as depicted in these, is that it tends to be shamrocks and shillelaghs. Like the World of Darkness wiki, I think, lists Ireland's main sort of products as being things like Aran sweaters and
Waterford Crystal.
Waterford Crystal, yeah, and whiskey, obviously.
Imagine, listeners, imagine if America there was listed as its main exports being Jack Daniels
and guns.
Yeah, although
Stetson hats.
Yeah, that's more. It's just
and
like
denim jeans, that kind of thing.
Please don't confuse tourism for our economy. I mean, we do have an awful lot of tourism in our economy, but it's not our exports. Those are all of your drugs.
Will we go on then? Okay, so we've touched on a few. There's loads more, and I'm sure anybody who bothers to stick depictions of Ireland in role playing into the search engines will find a whole bunch. There's a great, was it RPGNet?
Yeah, forum.rpg.net have a 7-year-old thread about this.
Yes, this goes back to 2013, and it is amazing that you can go back that far and it's all the same stuff.
I think we even recognized a few names on that.
Will we do it?
So
Doing
we
it.
have a 7-year-old quote by one Hida Owen, never heard of him before, which I'll just pull up here, is I can't think of a single RPG supplement that portrays Ireland accurately and takes advantage of its status as the corrupt little banana republic on the fringe of Europe.
See, I read that and thought, he's absolutely right. It brings us back to the fact that all of these depictions of Ireland sort of tend to top out at roughly the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And like nothing seems to appear after that. Either they're just being better researched and don't really raise their head above the parapet, or people have really just stopped using Ireland as an interesting location in RPGs.
Have we gone legit? Is that what you're saying? Has a Celtic title ruined our uniqueness?
I think, yeah, one too many Starbooks has sort of meant, well, why would I set anything in Ireland? It's not that different from anywhere else. So perhaps, having complained, we should now offer some solutions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how, if we're giving advice to potential RPG writers or game designers or GMs who want to do an Irish episode,
Yeah.
or an Irish supplement, what would we say about, let's take 3 strands. We'll look at like how we depict Ireland in fantasy settings,
Mm-hmm.
in the modern era,
Mm-hmm.
and in sort of cyberpunk future settings.
Yeah. 10 minutes in the future as opposed to Ireland in space. Although, now that you remind me that, I do recall there being at least one, I think it was actually the Warzone RPG, which the name of it's
Link in the show notes.
yeah,
What was it about it? That
Mutant
particularly Irish?
Chronicles. That's the
Oh,
one.
Mutant Chronicles, yeah.
Where mostly Irish had moved to the asteroid belt,
Of course.
and there was at least one asteroid that was fighting for independence against the British
Oh, no.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned this.
We're definitely back to terrible depictions. Okay, so let's look at Ireland and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned druids earlier on.
Yeah. The thing about druids and bards and all of these things is that if you're being accurate, quotation marks to the methods, they're not really functionally different to the wizards of thing. The great druid Cathbad is basically just Merlin. He shows up, he tells which kings, which women to impregnate to make heroes. He sees the future.
That's a skill.
It's a surprisingly common skill. It's
Matchmaking's been a long-held tradition in rural Ireland. So this guy was basically Merlin the matchmaker.
Yeah, but no, Merlin was a major matchmaking is probably the wrong. Let's just say that Merlin used his ability to see the future to interesting effect.
Kind of seeing where a Quidzac Haderach kind of comes from here.
Maybe.
That's right, we're claiming Space Jesus as Irish. So what would you say should be done differently to make it better?
Remove the Roman. That is our major difference from our things, that we have basically no Roman influence on us until the Middle Ages and the invasion of Strongbow and the Normans.
Yeah.
So we did not have, Ireland did not have a history of imperialism and of widespread rule in the same way that France, England and Italy would have had. There was no real concept of
Political unity or uniformness at all.
There was, of course, a legendary High King of Ireland, although again it is debated whether that was just sort of backfilled in around the Middle Ages when kings became cool.
So it is a good point though. Like Ireland in that period is very much more fragmented and a bit like traditional D&D. It's like you're king of everything you can see and not much beyond that.
Yes, Ireland was still civilized compared to all of the other countries around it, but each pocket of civilization was its own pocket. It was sort of Points of Light-esque.
There was a common law
Yeah.
through, what was it called? There was a common sort of structure of law.
Yeah, and this is where the bards came in, is that they were among the few people who would travel between these settlements. And they were the ones who brought the stories, brought the tales of what was happening. And this is why bards were so important in Irish culture, is because you wanted to make sure that they were telling good stories about you, so that all the other petty kings of Ireland would respect you in what you were getting up to in your kingdom.
So let's make some concrete things to insert into your fantasy campaign to depict Irish land.
Forest is one of the major things. Is that?
Well, I think I'll jump in there. So as much as politically very fragmented, one of the things about Ireland in that period is that, as you say, because of the lack of Roman influence, no roads. No major road building that ever went on. No major forest clearance until much later on. So
everyone just cleared what farmland they needed. They didn't just cut the whole thing.
They were those points of light
and
clear land in what was a very heavily forested country. So if you want to depict a sort of fantasy Ireland, you can say it's an island that is almost entirely covered in forests. No one has built a road to anywhere. You need local guides to get between these small settlements, and rulers are very much more on the level of tribal rulers rather than feudal kings. So, which is interesting.
Yeah, family becomes incredibly important because it's your proof of loyalty and
you're probably related to almost everybody you know. So when a bunch of adventurers arrive from the forest, claiming that they're heading for the other coast or something.
Those could just be the fairy folk.
They could. A huge amount of distrust then if you're from outside of the circle. And so it's, a more sort of tribal depiction is probably key to representing.
Again, it's not that Ireland was primitive, it's that it operated under its own system.
You couldn't take the lay of the land because you couldn't see the land unless you could get up somewhere very high. And what you could see for the most part was just more forest. So you had to know roughly where other settlements were, and it makes for a much different sort of setting than a kind of farmland and rolling hills and roads that go between towns and the knights and squires and all that kind of stuff.
One other smaller point is that the spear is much more important in Irish legend than the sword. There are some swords of legends, including what's probably the same kind of root myth that turned into Excalibur in the Cleave Chalice. But yes,
if you want to get serious about a fantasy weapon in Irish settings, it's the fear bullock, isn't it?
Okay, there's a few ones out there, but yes, the spear is very important. It's the weapon of a warrior at war is the spear.
Yep.
And skill with the spear is the mark of a Celtic hero.
Excellent. Will we go and look at the modern then?
Okay. So we're going to assume that you mean this modern as opposed to the weird 80s modern that a lot of previous games covered.
Yeah. So the 21st century Ireland. How do you depict that in a modern setting? And modern settings would be maybe Cthulhu, Knights Black Agents, GURPS. You can pick and choose.
A lot more corporate than you realize, and an awful lot of names that you might associate with American corporations can actually be very strongly associated with Ireland.
Yeah,
particularly
plenty of Starbucks, plenty of McDonald's, all that kind of stuff.
Pharmaceutical companies. Big Pharma is here in a big way. Pfizer do most of the work here. All that Viagra gets made in a big factory in Cork.
I don't know if it's true anymore, but apparently at one point we were making most of the cancer testing kits worldwide. Like we're a major hub for pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah,
especially out west.
And support industries for the pharmaceutical business consultants, software companies. All these places they will have their set country headquarters around Ireland as opposed to another European country, because that makes it easier to support the big pharmaceuticals.
So if you're running a modern game, anything to do with pharmaceuticals, you'll find cutting edge stuff here. You might even find research labs that could house deadly viruses or things that might turn the dead on life.
A little bit topical here, Savage.
Oh, we are in the midst of... We're ramping up for an outbreak of the coronavirus as we record this. By Paddy's Day...
we'll all be dead.
Well, it won't really be terribly noticeable whether we're sick or drunk or whatever, so it's it's an open question as to what happens.
Alcohol is what you use to clean your hands, right?
And my insides. So yes, an outbreak scenario would be very plausible in modern Ireland because there's so much farmer research. Now, this is not to say that farmer research companies in the real world, here and now, aren't doing their absolute industry-mandated best to prevent anything of this sort.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very good record.
Yeah.
And the industry here has a very good record in terms of we're highly compliant with some of the most stringent
because it's in the EU, and we have, we regulate our industries here.
But in a sort of faster, looser setting where things go wrong all the time, you could use our background in big pharma as an excellent springboard for an outbreak scenario or a zombie virus scenario or something like a pandemic, something like that. Something that creates a crisis.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the two Irelands?
The north-south question.
No. I mean...
rural and urban.
Yes. Okay, so... Listeners, this is something that becomes a little bit more obvious if you live in Ireland, but there's basically the Republic of Ireland. There's basically two parts to Ireland. There's Dublin and there's everywhere else.
Yeah, in many, many ways.
This is, I still can't get over this, but Dublin is one of the biggest examples of, and I can't believe this is the actual term, but it is a primate city. There's a superhero scenario for the right.
What does that mean?
As in... Dublin is basically the size of the next 5 cities in Ireland put together.
Right. Or
something along those lines. It is
a star in the solar system of Irish urban centres.
Yes. It's something like 25% of the population lives in Dublin on its hinterlands.
Now, that's not to say that Dublin is the only city or the only city worth visiting in Ireland or talking about.
Yeah.
Because we have so few really major urban centres, all of them have their own particular kind of character.
Yeah.
Which is something, I mean, if you wanted to just break it down into the crudest terms, north, south, east and west, you've got Dublin, or Belfast in the north, south is Cork, east is Dublin, of course, and west is Galway.
Although Limerick keeps trying to stab Galway in the back and steal its change, and it's so far failed.
Limerick is an interesting place, yes. It's no Athlone.
Yeah.
And those, a little bit of research about each of those would tell you that Belfast was, of course, has a political dimension, but perhaps in a more general sense, heavy industry and shipping.
Mm-hmm.
Galway, the home of many, many artists and art exhibitions and festivals, and Galway races, very big. So horse racing is quite big out there. Dublin being the services and corporate heartland, obviously a major population centre, and a city divided by a river into two distinct cultures, which is kind of interesting thing to explore in an RPG.
Yeah.
And what do we say about Cork? 2 rivers completely united culturally, probably the best shippers in the country.
Well, they're not terrible.
This is coming from a Roscommon man, so I don't have a dog in this race. Cork was obviously it's a telecommunications hub. Because so many of the Atlantic lines come into Cork and Cork adjacent places. Also houses our best safari park,
Photo
Wildlife Park, which has probably the most magnificent collection of tigers anywhere in Ireland. Which is not saying much, but it is. Cork is a beautiful city with its own rich history and culture.
Yeah,
it is probably the second city culturally. It has its own brands of porter and stout that it would contend are much better than Dublin's. In fairness, if we want to talk about the Dublin Cork argument, it's Dublin 1 river, 1 stout. Cork 2 rivers, 3 stouts.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Like Corkonians are unified in their outlook and diverse in their tastes. Dublin split between the river and somewhat in agreement on the best thing to order in the pub, which is of course Guinness.
Yeah.
Then, so other things to say about modern Ireland.
I think there's this, and the reason I brought this up in the first place is because it really brings up the sort of there's a good urban and rural dichotomy in Ireland.
Yeah.
And you're never too far from either or. If you have a campaign based in Ireland, you can have your weird fairy fort based Shucks and Bagora rural adventure, and then the heroes can hop in a car, and 3 hours later they could be in the heart of Dublin having this corporate espionage adventure.
Yeah. Not to mention, those things aren't necessarily completely separate. I have a friend who told a story about being accosted outside a supermarket down country and being asked some very probing questions about his work with a telecoms network by someone who was clearly engaged in corporate espionage. Probably hop back in the train and go and report what he'd found to his corporate overlords here in Dublin. And that's in the real world. That's today.
Yeah.
Other things to say about you mentioned the roads. What the Romans couldn't do, the European Union has managed to do, and built a whole bunch of straight roads through the country.
Yeah.
But even those are forced sometimes to divert around things like ferry forts, and these are prehistorical structures. Really, these date back to the Stone Age. Some of them.
It depends from fort to fort, but basically, when someone is talking about a ferry fort, what they mean is something that is a early medieval or earlier fortification, which was abandoned centuries ago. People forgot what it was, and then when it was sort of rediscovered in the taming of Ireland, it was people started describing it as something that the fairies had made, because even they had forgotten the culture and started assuming that these forests were the lands of the fairies, even though they had actually been kingdoms of Ireland in the past. And there is sort of this lingering, even though we're a pretty secular country, there's still this lingering respect for these things. Well, which to be fair is partly because these are heritage sites and should probably be preserved, but also there's still this twinge of the supernatural in it that has a little bit more influence over Irish thought than we like to admit sometimes.
If somebody at some point in the past put one stone on top of another, it's very hard to find an Irishman who's willing to knock it down. And that could be, some of these are Neolithic sites, some of these are fortifications from the pre-Roman, pre-Christian era. Some of these are and then we get to the Norman forts and castles, and any of them can be found, and all of them have the potential to divert a road. Yeah. So it's a feature of modern Ireland, it is tying we have this sort of romanticized past that we kind of vaguely understand.
Yeah.
Archaeologically, it's fascinating. We've been populated, but not developed in a more sort of medieval sense. But we've kind of taken our own path. It is really important, I suppose, in modern Ireland and because you're talking, the big urban-rural divide stems in part from the famine, which occurred in the sort of late 1800s, and saw a major exodus from the country. You have to recall, modern Ireland houses about 5.5-6 million people between north and south. Ireland pre the famine had about 8 million people on the land, probably much more evenly distributed as well. A feature of rural Ireland is tiny fields. There's as much stonework as field out there, and that's because the place was so densely, after the deforestation, so much farmland opened up that it became densely populated. You had huge numbers of people living on the land, who then subsequently either died or left, leaving us with a very sparsely, some of the lowest population density in Europe today. And of course, most of those people are crowded into 4 or 5 major cities on the island, which means that we have returned to a landscape that is half civilized, half wild in places, because there simply isn't anyone there to look after it or to do anything with it. And then a huge agrarian sort of economy.
It would be difficult for us to succinctly go over the influence of British imperialism and the Catholic Church as our self-imposed...
Heavy stuff. If you were running World of Darkness or Cthulhu, you might find something there. I think we'll probably leave it for now. But it's worth mentioning that, yes, there are... in a gross term, you could just set them up as boogeymen. If you were to take a more nuanced approach, you can find good and bad in all of these major movements. Now, I found a tweet today that it has absolutely nothing to do with role playing, but I thought it illustrated the urban-rural sort of divide in an interesting way. I'm just going to read it for you.
Okay.
Shane hasn't heard this, and we haven't passed this by anybody. But I found it today, and it reads like this. People think Donegal is conservative, but I met a woman working in a charity shop who broke her wrist in 2 places while pole dancing. And my town is full of queers and gay people, and my postman knows I feed my menstrual blood my pot plants, because one day he caught me at it. That's your home county, isn't it, Shane?
Yes.
Rural Ireland is as strange and awkward and weird as anywhere. I mean, you're as likely to stumble across a putching still, a pole dancing class, or a pot farm out there as you are to find any of the above in Dublin or any of the other major
that's
urban
fair.
centres. We very swiftly, I think we'll cover some of sci-fi or cyberpunk Ireland, and then I think we're going to have to finally let our listeners go to nurse their Paddy's Day hangovers. So, cyberpunk Ireland, future Ireland.
Well, we don't want to be doing predictive trends, particularly with the impending doom of all life. Apparently, hangover ads.
Wash your hands.
Yeah, and if you weren't washing your hands before the coronavirus outbreak, that's probably your fault. All those dead people. But
not touching it.
and you shouldn't.
So future Ireland, or sci-fi or cyberpunk Ireland.
I think we have to address the fact that Ireland has become this sort of corporate haven for a lot of reasons, some good, some bad. But this is likely to be a feature of any cyberpunk Ireland, is that all the corporations want to have a representative facility in Ireland. Some of this will just be administrative stuff. Some of it will be their biggest factories producing all kinds of things. Ireland has a huge number of highly skilled workers because we focused so hard in education over the last few decades.
It's a big tech footprint.
Yes. So tech companies would likely be dominating the future, and if you're in the mega corporation future cyberpunk, there's going to be a big emphasis on the corporations. And conversely, there's going to be a rise in one of Ireland's one of the best pastimes, complaining about things. You're going to get groups, activists, probably a few punks of the cyber variety.
Yeah, there's a strong punk tradition here in Dublin.
Yeah, and Limerick, apparently that's apparently one of their big things.
So if you think Berlin is a good cyberpunk city, think Dublin. Like we're building a sort of a corporate enclave down on the Docklands in Dublin at the moment, and that's only going to shoot higher and higher. So you'll have these spires of steel and glass where the corporate the megacorps duke it out in the boardroom and in the streets, and then you've got rich sort of history of urban sort of squalor and tenements and cyber squatting and all these other things you can kind of blend together in the urban cyberpunk kind of milieu set in Dublin.
Yeah, Dublin has been trying to modernize itself for decades, and it is an ongoing struggle. There's a huge amount of interplay between Dublin's past as a city of both Irish and British importance.
It's Georgian architecture,
yeah,
holding the line against any sort of upward expansion for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of red brick, tends to be below 4 stories, 5 stories. And
most of them are 2 or less.
2 or 3, yeah. But they've held our skyline very low.
Yeah,
it's a feature of the city. But of course, you can contrast that against the urban sort of spires of the mega corporations. And the other thing I'd say about a future sort of cyberpunky Ireland is, and it's something that is sort of extrapolating from the current trend, is we've got a rich geography that we've talked about. Geologically, very stable.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot happens under the ground here. So Ireland is free of tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanoes, obviously.
Yeah, it was shaped by these things hundreds of thousands of years ago, but all those things have gone away as the hot spots have...
But what it means is it's a great place to build very sensitive tech. and because of our temperate and probably we're quite cold, but not as cold as some of the same places on the same latitude. But it's a great place to start up data centers. Mm-hmm. All you have to do to cool a data center in Ireland is simply open a few windows.
Yeah, that's fair.
In the height of summer, it'll still be cold.
There's also, as you mentioned, the long-standing tradition of having cables and stuff come in.
The North Atlantic cables that communicate between Europe and the US make their landfall in Cork.
Yeah, because it's
Kerry.
slightly geologically closer to Canada than Spain is, so you save a bit off the top.
That's where it starts from. But the point about data centers is, of course, if you've got big data centers, we extrapolate, we get to AI.
Yeah.
So AI's resident in Ireland, so the AI citizens could be an interesting sort of way to look at, because they're here for the climate. They like it. It's a comfortable place to put your home servers.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about slightly less dystopian sci-fi, there's a also point is that Ireland is a very Atlantic country, and with a big naval tradition. So if your future setting has something to do with, say, climate change or restoring the currents in the Atlantic drift and such, Ireland would be a very good place to base it, and have like a scientific centre dedicated to controlling climate and such.
Right. Yeah. So taking a sort of a geopunk take on things and talking about as you say, fixing it before it's totally broken. Mm-hmm. Less dystopian and more hopeful. Yeah. That's a good one. I hadn't considered that. Okay, so this has been a cracker. Absolutely. We had the opportunity to talk to some of our listeners and to go over some of the problematic depictions of our little country in the past and the people, of course. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some good suggestions there to how you might use a sort of fresh take on Ireland in your role-playing games to give a better sense of what the country and the people are actually like. But we've reached probably the end of our listeners' patience at this point, so we should probably go and get ourselves a big old Irish breakfast, and maybe take a walk along the canals and take in some of the fresh air and avoid the casualties of Paddy's Day. So Shane, where can we find us online?
We are in at theadventuringparty.net.
Yep.
We are SpeakPipe / The Adventuring Party.
It'll all be in the show notes. We're on SpeakPipe if you want to talk to us.
We're on Twitter.
You can find us on Twitter. Follow us there. Facebook, we're posting a bit more now. We're talking to people. Mm-hmm. Go to YouTube if you want to see the artwork for this episode, which will be on the title card. And there must be somewhere else. Discord server.
Oh, yes.
Go to our Discord server, which definitely exists, and you can definitely visit and drop us a line about this episode, or we'll set up some other channels that we can talk about different things there. I don't know how it works. I'm going to have it explained to me by a big brain later this week. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really it. So, Céad Míle Fáilte.
This party's over.
Sure, you've been listening to The Adventuring Party, and wasn't it a fine, soft show? Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this Paddy Day special. If you'd like to reach out to us or find show notes for this episode, you can head on over to theadventuringparty.net. There you'll find links to our Facebook page, our Twitter feed. You can find our YouTube channel link there. You can find a link out to SpeakPipe, where you can send us a message. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going between episodes. So log on there and let us know what you think. Goodbye.
Excellent. Whew. I need a pint after all that.
Well,
or a whiskey. And it should be noted, of course, that Irish whiskey is Irish. Whatever the Scots make is Scotch. And that sweet water from across the Atlantic is bourbon. But the only place to get whiskey is Ireland, yeah?
No comment.